So here are some things to keep in mind before you even start cutting into your drywall. You may have electrical, HVAC, or plumbing running in through the cavity in between the two studs. If there is electrical and HVAC and plumbing behind, it's not the end of the world. You can still cut it out. Just be mindful of what's behind there. And only keep the thickness of the drywall to the blade. So you don't need the whole blade of the saw going into the drywall patch. Once you have your markings, we're going to start squaring up and drawing out a line to cut. Simply use your square, match up to your one line and your side line and your top line. Trace the square, rotate it down, line it up with the line you just traced, go to your bottom line, mark line, repeat for the last side. 4 marks, you can then get a nice square cut. That's going to help you with a patch. Also, when I did my 5x5 markings, now I know I simply have a 5x5 piece to cut out of a scrap piece of drywall. Once you have your markings for where you need to cut, get your drywall saw, start in one corner, push the tip of your saw in, twist it, and you'll make a hole. Now my saw is in. As I said, if you have electrical and HVAC and plumbing behind, you want to keep that in mind. So you don't want the whole saw to go through. You want to just use the tip of the saw to make your cut. So once you've got your hole cut out and it's nice and square, you want to clean up the edges. When the paper's frayed like this, it can be a little difficult to coat and get a nice clean finish. So you simply want to take your X-Acto knife on a 45 and score back and create a bevel. It's going to clean up the paper there. This also kind of grooves it a little bit of a V groove once you put your piece in, and it helps get the mud into the joint itself. Okay, now we're ready to cut a piece of drywall to go in our space, our cavity. So just double check. We know that when we first took the measurements, we did a 5x5 to keep it simple, but it might be bigger, it might be smaller, depending on how accurate you were. So I have 5 and 5 1/4. So you don't want your piece to be super tight. I wouldn't go 5 1/4 and 5. I would do maybe 4 7/8 and 5 1/8. That will give me a little bit of room to play with the piece. If it is super tight, when you go to put it in, you may damage it. So when you're cutting a piece of drywall, you want to try and use factory edges to pull your measurements. If you have a piece that has been cut, now, if it does have a factory edge, then try to work off that edge. Or if it has been cut and it's just a scrap, then try to use a square and try to re-establish a square or a 90-degree corner so you can pull your measurements. But as I said, it's easiest just to work off of a factory edge. This is a factory edge, but it's tapered. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's about 1/2 inches here, and then it tapers down to lesser thickness here, about 1/4 inch there. And that's to allow for when two sheets butt up to each other, it creates a seam. So when you apply your mud, it doesn't build out as much and it's easier to float out. But keep in mind when you are using a piece of drywall that there is factory edges that are tapered and smaller. So if you do go to put it in, it will be recessed and it won't be the same thickness of the drywall that's on the walls. So here I'm just measuring 5 or 4 7/8. Now you want to use a straight edge. I'm just using a level because I know this edge of it is perfectly straight. There's no wobble to it. And you can draw your line and then score it, or you can, so that will be my strip. I know it's a little big. but we'll cut it to size, and it's just easier to cut the drywall this way than trying to cut out a 5x5 piece, and you'll see in a second. So now you need an X-Acto knife. Any X-Acto knife will work. Just need an X-Acto knife, and then you can use your straight edge, line up your 2 points. So I usually skip the step of drawing the pencil line, but I did it so you can see what we're gonna have. And now what I'll do is I'll pull my 2 measurements, line up my straight edge, and then just use my knife to score the edge. Now you're not putting a lot of pressure, you're not trying to cut through the whole sheet because drywall is very easy to cut. And all you need to do is give it a little tap, and it will bend and break. And then you simply want to fold the drywall back on itself, and you'll have a crease on the back side of the paper, and you want to cut the paper like you did with the front, and there you go. Now you have 1 dimension cut, which is 5, and the other is 5 1/4. So we'll repeat this process again. 5 1/4 at the top, 5 1/4 at the bottom. And this is a little trick. You can just use the straight edge of your tape for the smaller measurements. There you go. And for smaller ones, you can still use a straight edge if you want to, or you can simply use your free hand and trace that line. Now, as we beveled this, we also want to bevel this. For our blocking, I'm just going to go over how to set a drywall screw. It's not really like setting a wood screw where you can drive it home. There's kind of a threshold with the paper. So if you can buy a dimpler, and I'll show you how that's used in a second. But if you don't have a dimpler, you just need your Phillips bit. And you really don't want to drive it home like that, because then it's peeled through the paper. The back layer of the paper might be catching it, but it really isn't holding the weight of this or anything that's going to be attached to the drywall after. So if you can see here, this is a good example where it's just catching the paper. There's a dimple. So when you get close, if you don't have a dimpler, when you get close, you can just gently squeeze the trigger and you feel it tight, and there you go. And the reason why you want to have it in a little bit, but not too far, is for when you're coating it. So there you go. So there, I put the screw on a little bit of angle. So if you do put them on an angle, that's another thing. You want your screws to be as straight as you can for this purpose. And you can see that the head is still poking through. So when you go to coat that, you'll have to build that out, and not how you want your screws to be coated. So if you do have screws like that, you can tighten it a little bit like that, and you want to just make sure that you have it in far enough that when you go to coat, it coats. So now we're ready to cut and install the blocking. Blocking is simply a piece of wood. It could be a 2x4, piece of plywood. In this case, I've used plywood. I like to use plywood mainly because it's thinner and it's easier to manipulate and move into your cavity. The reason why you need to install blocking is because right now, obviously, we have nothing to catch when we go to put our piece in. We need something to secure the piece to and screw to, which is blocking. So when I go to measure my blocking, what I like to do is measure an inch below and an inch above. So in this case, we have 8 inches. And they'll roughly be about 3 inches wide. So here's a little trick to free up your hands when you're installing your blocking. Simply start your screws fiddling around. Now if you do have HVAC, plumbing, or electrical in your cavity, it might be a little awkward to get the piece in, so try and fiddle it in as best as you can. If you don't, it's that much easier. Now we know we have an inch above, an inch below. There's the bottom of my piece. I'm going to slide that down a little bit. Now I'm keeping pressure on the back of the plywood. If I don't, the screw will push the piece and it won't anchor itself into the wood. So keep pressure on the back of the plywood. And there you go. You have a piece of blocking. Another little trick is to put a screw on the piece of blocking. That will give you a handle to pull and give you to apply pressure, as I was saying, to when you're anchoring in. So you want to try and test your piece, and if it is a little tight and not lining properly, just hold it up, use your pencil, draw a little mark, and shave it. And when it does break, you know, you want to file it down, get it nice, and while you do your bevel, because when it breaks, it'll break on the paper, but the sheetrock inside might crumble and break. So you might have to shave that down with your knife or any flat edge, and you'll get it in, get your piece to how you like it. And as I said, you don't want to be tight because you'll break your piece, and you just want maybe eighth of a gap around your piece. Okay, so again, we don't want to over tighten our screws. We just want them to catch. Okay, now we've got our piece in. Now I like to use fiber tape or mesh tape, whatever you want to call it. You can buy this anywhere at Home Depot. It's not anything fancy. It has a sticky side to it, and that sticky side goes onto the wall. So it's very simple. Start in the middle or at the bottom and scrape your 4-inch knife over the piece of tape. You want to split the crack in the middle, or the gap there. You want to split that so you got half of it on the wall, half of it on your piece. Now if you have painted walls, this stuff does not really like to stick to painted walls. It can peel off, so try to run your hand over it, get it to stick as best as you can. And this is the little trick here. Pull, and it cuts very clean and easy. You can use scissors if you find that difficult. You don't want any loose fibers because that will mess up your coating. So if it is starting to fall off and it's very difficult, in this case this stuff is pretty sticky and it's fresh drywall, so it sticks to it quite well. As I said, if you have painted walls, it's going to have a hard time sticking to the paint and it may peel off, and you'll find that it will bubble, and you don't want something like that because that will create a headache for you when you go to tape it. So you really want to take your time here and get this as flush and as smooth.